In the early 1980s, amidst significant social and political upheaval marked by apartheid's oppressive grip and heightened militarization, South Africa faced another growing crisis. The first AIDS-related death in South Africa occurred in December of 1981, followed by another in January of 1982. By 1990, between 74,000 to 120,000 South Africans were reportedly living with HIV. Although P.W. Botha subsequently addressed a conference on the potential threats of the disease and a structure called the AIDS Unit and the National Advisory Group were introduced in 1988, the apartheid regime largely ignored the disease. Prevalent prejudicial perceptions were that it primarily affected black individuals or the LGBTQI+ community. In 1989, the primary focus of progressive anti-apartheid movements was on the immediate task of liberating the country, with little attention given to the potential future threat of AIDS. In May 1994, South Africa elected its government of national unity with Nelson Mandela as president and Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma as the first post-apartheid Minister of Health. Within a month, through the government's Reconstruction and Development Program, the government introduced new structures for civil society's input on HIV/AIDS policy. The following year, then Deputy President Thabo Mbeki opened the 7th International Conference for People Living with HIV and AIDS in Cape Town. This marked a significant step in South Africa's global engagement. But subsequent actions started raising doubts within civil society about the government's approach and management of the disease. First, activists criticized the 1996 placement of the HIV and AIDS and sexually transmitted diseases programming directorate in the health department instead of the presidency, a contradiction of the National AIDS Plan, which they viewed as the state's failure to appreciate the pandemic as more than just a public health issue. This was followed by the Virodine scandal in 1997, a reported toxic concoction drug said to be locally produced and endorsed by the government as a possible response to AIDS, but later found to be an industrial solvent with no benefit. Around the same time, the state had blocked the distribution of an antiviral drug called zidovudine, or AZT, in the public health system, questioning its safety and high cost. A political storm had been unleashed, one between the state and pharmaceutical companies, and another between the state and civil society. On the 10th of December of 1998, on International Human Rights Day, a group of activists founded the Treatment Action Campaign, or TAC, to protest the government's refusal to distribute AIDS medication. On the 14th of June 1999, Thabo Mbeki became the second president of post-apartheid South Africa, with Dr. Manto Shabalala Msimang as Minister of Health.
The health researcher came to me, Lynette Saith, with a message from Dr. Eben Komo, saying that the president of the country, President Thabo Mbeki, had become an AIDS denialist. I couldn't believe it, no one could believe it. We thought it was a rumor. And slowly we learned that it actually was true. Thabo Mbeki had asked Dr. John Machila and Professor Malekapuru William Mahoba to look at the evidence from the HIV denialists. Now that wasn't evidence, those were inventions, the grabbing of little bits of information from other scientific materials. For instance, it said side effects of ARVs were terrible. And the initial ARVs like AZT and so on, DDI, D40, had serious side effects, terrible side effects. But they were no different to the side effects of most medicines for serious illnesses. And so they grabbed that little bit of information to say no one should take antiretrovirals because it's poison. Never mind the fact that more than 90% of people survived with those antiretrovirals.
2000, an estimated 4.2 million South Africans were infected with HIV, with nearly 1,000 people dying every day. treatment was out of reach for the majority, costing about 90,000 rands per year.
What then happened as a consequence of our campaign against the drug companies was in 2000, Christopher Maraka died, and he died of a preventable illness which was systemic thrush. And he choked to death. That was July 2000. In May 2000, he had given evidence to Parliament to say that Pfizer, the company who made fluconazole and who owned the patent on it, was charging 3,000 rand a week and making $6 billion worth of profit from that in the United States. And that is why they wouldn't bring the price down.
In the same year, the Interministerial Committee on AIDS was replaced by the National AIDS Council. The battle against HIV and AIDS further escalated in the same year when President Mbeki sent a letter to world leaders expressing his doubt that HIV was the exclusive cause of AIDS and arguing for a consideration of socio-economic causes. A period known as AIDS denialism, which brought international condemnation to the South African government.
The MPs cheered at that. Most of the MPs cheered at that. Now, that moment set us on the road to perdition in the country. It set us onto the road of the destruction of life. So suddenly, here was someone like me with an illness, denied an acknowledgement of an illness that was starting to cause enormous illness in my own body. Never mind the fact that there are millions of people out there who required support, who required openness to be created. For people to wear t-shirts like the one I'm wearing, to assert that there should be solidarity and support for people living with HIV. To have your president deny your illness and your right to life is one of the worst things that can happen in any country.
Together with his health minister, Manto Shabalala Msamang, they were criticized for politicizing the disease when people were dying, while also embracing untested alternative treatment from the so-called AIDS dissidents. In April of 2001, the South African government successfully defended legislation enabling the local production of affordable generic medicines, including ARVs. However, ARV provision through public health channels remained insufficient.
The government's court papers were so technical that no one could really understand it. And there was no life in it. There was no people who needed medicines who said, this is the reason why government needs to bring the prices of medicine down. And TAC, the Treatment Action Campaign, decided to join the court case on the side of government, not against it, against the drug companies. The drug companies had behind them Bill Clinton. They had behind them a range of European governments. They had behind them the World Trade Organizations, or so they thought. But we had greater support. We had much greater support. We had support in over 70 countries in the world.
The celebrations were short-lived as more lingering questions remained about the state's policy position, as the country hosted the 13th International AIDS Conference in Durban.
On the 5th of July 2002, I'll never forget the day, I was very sick in bed. I was meant to be at the Barcelona AIDS Conference, and the Constitutional Court handed down a judgment which said government had the duty to, without delay, implement a program to prevent mother-to-child transmission, and that it should use nevirapine. It would cost government 10 rand a pill to save a child from getting HIV. And the court said government could use any medicine that does that, but it must do it.
On April 22, 2009, Jacob Zuma was elected as President of South Africa and Dr. Aaron Mthalane became his health minister. President Zuma's cabinet committed to testing all children exposed to HIV and provide all HIV-positive children with ARVs. To date, South Africa has the largest HIV treatment program in the world, with nearly 6 of its 8 million HIV-positive people on treatment. Silondiwe Mthalane for Democracy 30, SABC News in Johannesburg.